George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
And it's live from Rochdale. Gaga Joe Biden, fresh from the stage at the D-Day Normandy 80th anniversary commemorations, is beginning to look perfectly unhinged. I've just been looking at him in a kind of, I don't know, African church chorus line. Well, you have to see it. And of course, on Sunday, as government after government fell while we were on the air, as little soldier Scholz got whipped by the AFD and bonkers Baerbock saw her party's share of the vote halved in real time, and little Macron was forced into calling an emergency French general election, having been humiliated by MarineLePen of the French National Rally. We clean forgot about Belgium. It can happen. Belgium, its government not only fell while we were on the air, and we omitted to bring it to you, but the Prime Minister cried on air at the very disastrous nature of it all. Cry more, all you centrists. Your swamp has sunk below the waterline. In France, there's a new rally, a new popular front uniting all the forces of the French left. How will they do against MarineLePen? And what will they do to little Macron, who's going to be reduced to a humiliating third place? How can he cohabit with such a new set of political realities? And as for the British election, don't get me started. Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night. It is the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
I'm just looking again at this video of Joe Biden with the gospel singers. Who looks at that and says what he needs is another 4-year term as president of the most powerful country on the earth? We've just sent it to the director. See if we can put it up on the stage. It is truly remarkable, even by Joe Biden's standards. Yes, he pooed his pants on the stage at the D-Day celebrations. Yes, he bent down in order to do so, like anyone who's ever had a toddler knows is the case. Yes, he was led away, finally and belatedly, by Dr. Jill Biden. But the question is, how long can this farce be allowed to continue? How long can the Americans pretend that this man is in charge? How long can the Americans pretend that this man is fit to have the nuclear football at his disposal? He could actually send the entire planet up in nuclear smoke whilst thinking he's ringing for an orderly or for the lavatory. This farce must end, and surely it will end if Joe Biden is the candidate in a Donald Trump victory. In which case, a whole new set of variables kick in. Hunter Biden is almost certain to go to jail for decades, at least if the judges follow the advice given by Joe Biden when a senator for other people convicted of the same offenses as his. In fact, you follow the Biden punishment policy, Hunter is going down for 25 years. The crack smoking, underage sex addict who bought an automatic weapon whilst under the influence of crack. It's definitely a 25-year stretch if Joe Biden's policy is to be implemented. Now, what does all this mean for the American presidential election? We'll be talking to the very sharp American commentator, Anya Parampil, about this later in the show. But Europe is where most of my attention has been this year. The European Parliament elections were truly remarkable. The AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland, the German Nationalist Party, scored a thumping victory over little soldier Scholz and an even bigger thumping victory over bonkers Baerbock, the stupidest foreign minister in the history of the world. You know, the one who accused one of our rivals of making a 360-degree turn. But the reality is the French general election is now going to attract most attention. It's an emergency general election called by President Macron because MarineLePen got 34% to his 14.9%. A humiliating rebuff that threatens the very nature of the French Republic itself, because MarineLePen has said that she's going to take France out of the new world order and that Macron is going to be under arrest. Well, that's what you call a constitutional standoff, because if MarineLePen wins a majority, as surely she now must, at least a plurality of the French Assemblée Nationale, then we're going to have cohabitation of the most turbulent sort, with a different majority in the Assembly and a different political stripe in the presidential palace. Little Macron is done, finished, kippered. He might as well take his young bride away for a very long cruise. Because the reality is the public all over Europe demonstrated, in France, in Belgium, in the Netherlands, in Austria, and in Germany, a dramatic switch to anti-globalist parties, mainly of the right. Not the far right, this casual, foolish designation of everybody as a Nazi is, of course, a self-fulfilling prophecy. But the right, the nationalists, have trumped the globalists. They've trumped the WEF. They've trumped Davos. They've trumped the EU, and they have trumped NATO. Because the proximate reason for the total annihilation of the centre ground in the European Parliament elections is the economic crisis brought on by NATO's demand that these European governments sanction Russia, sanction themselves from cheap energy, buy expensive American energy instead, and see their industries literally ship out in the case of Germany and fall and fall and fall according to the other European economies. The public ain't going to take it anymore. Macron's idea of sending French forces to march into Odessa and start World War III is now dead in the water. And the idea that the European economies are going to send endless shed loads of money to little Zelensky, the chief martial law administrator in Ukraine, is also now dead. There's going to be a dramatic shift in European politics. And von der Leyen, whose father was, of course, a Nazi officer, has said it will be business as usual, but everybody knows that it will not, because in Germany, and very soon in France, and right across Europe, all these governments have got to face their people in an election. In the same year that the British and the Americans are facing crucial elections. Let me turn to the British election and the counterpart of Le Pen, the counterpart of the AfD, the counterpart of Wilders, the counterpart of Meloni, by the name of Nigel Farage, is back in frontline politics. And I predicted that he would double the public opinion poll ratings of his party. It's really a private company called Reform UK brackets Limited. Quite new ground this in British politics, that Farage would take the Reform Party to hitherto undreamt of heights. And it looks like I am correct. I often am. I said that Nigel Farage is the smiling assassin of British nationalist politics. He's a conservative who's a more conservative, more palatable, more cheerful, more persuasive than the official Conservative Party. He will inherit the Conservative Party. He'll either inherit its dead body, or he may actually inherit the party as a whole, in toto, such as it is, after the forthcoming British general election. There might be a merger, a kind of hostile takeover by the smaller party, the Reform Party, which might not even, in the end, turn out to be the smaller. It may be that Nigel Farage is in command of a very substantial block of Reform MPs. Here in Rochdale, where I'm fighting the election, it's kind of obvious already that his party is my number one rival, which is not the reason I'm talking about it, although it would be a good enough reason, because, of course, the point of all these nationalist parties is to scapegoat minorities, and it will start with racial and religious minorities, but it will not end there. These parties always have to have a whipping boy, because none of them, and Maloney is the acme, the exemplar of this, none of them are prepared to actually confront openly the forces that are really responsible for the misery of scores, hundreds of millions of people all across Europe. They cannot, will not, determine not to confront the system, the globalized capitalist system, which has beggared and plunged into penury and cold with its net zero 2030, net zero 2050. We're all going to be cold as well as poor. And none of these right-wing parties will do anything about that. None of them will nationalize key industries in their countries. None of them will actually withdraw from the euro. None of them will actually withdraw from the European Union. None of them will leave NATO. And although they don't want war with Russia, none of them will give Russia its money back either and establish real economic relations again with the booming Russian and Chinese economies. None of them will do that, because in the end, their radicalism is false, or faux if you are French. Whereas people like me, people like Melenchon, people like Sarah Wagenknecht in Germany, we are serious about it. We don't want the EU. We don't want the euro. We don't want NATO. And we will not go to war for Joe Biden, a man who cannot even control the inner workings of his own body. We will not do it. And we will take whatever measures are necessary to rescue our people from this economic death spiral in which we have been plunged. Now, you're going to have to accept that the sun is rising in the east. It doesn't have to set in the west, only if you insist upon a zero-sum game competition with the east does it need to set in the west, because we simply cannot win any zero-sum game. We've lost at the starting line. My own brother-in-law arrived in Shanghai maybe a month ago, and he's already decided he's staying in China. He's asking for permission to live the rest of his life and work in China. And if you've ever been in Shanghai, if you've ever seen Shanghai, you know the reason why. It's like night and day. It is like being in the future and then stepping back into the past. Labour in Britain have just said that they're going to fill 1 million potholes. First of all, that's how many potholes we've got. Actually, times 5. What are they going to fill them with? They're not going to spend any extra money, because they can't spend any extra money. That would require taking some of the money of the multi-billionaires that have made such fortunes in the COVID and post-COVID areas. They are going to fill them perhaps with Keir Starmer's broken pledges. But my point is, there ain't no potholes in China. There ain't no potholes in Shanghai. My wife's just arrived on a train, hours late, with no air conditioning, with no coffee on board the train. In Shanghai to Beijing, you travel about 300 kilometers an hour and you can balance your coffee endlessly filled up on the windowsill and it will not spill. China is in a different planet to us. Russia and China are now the closest possible allies. What an achievement of American statecraft that is. Here's my point. We cannot win competition with the rising sun in the east. What we needed to do, haven't done, but will have to do, if there's to be any future for us, is try and get close to those people whose sun is rising. Offer them the services that we have to offer. Offer them the centuries of wisdom and learning and technology in the medical field, for example. Offer them places in our fine universities. Find the things we've still got that can be of use to the East in its renaissance. We could do that. We could play that role. But not if we've got governments whose only discourse is to wag a finger, shake a fist, and threaten the people who are leaving us floundering in their slipstream. And that's why the British general election result is actually going to mean almost nothing at all. You will not notice one iota of difference if the power in Britain switches from Rishi Sunak to Keir Starmer. When I say they're two cheeks of the same backside, actually they are one cheek of the same backside. They are indistinguishable. Neither deserves to be described in any other way. You will find no difference in the foreign policy. You will find no difference in the domestic policy. You'll find no difference in the cultural and social questions. Neither of the two front benches can define what a woman is. Both of the front benches think that a woman can have a penis and a man can have a cervix. Both of them will be on the endless LGBTQ plus A, or I missed out the 2SL. They're all on the same cultural, social page. They're all Blairites now. And that's why the British general election, unless Farage breaks through, unless we break through, will lead to the switching off of the Parliament channel all over the land. Nobody will be interested in anything that is happening in the British Parliament because nothing of any importance will be happening. Which leaves me time only to discuss the subject of our poll tonight. Will Israel accept the peace deal? Yes or no? Well, the truthful answer is maybe yes, maybe no. If Netanyahu stays in the saddle, and that's a moot question, then maybe yes, and maybe for a little while. If Netanyahu is overthrown, then it's maybe no. One thing is for sure. Neither Israel nor the Western governments that bankroll it, arm it, give it diplomatic protection on the international scene, and the mass media propaganda support is in any doubt there will be no Palestinian state. And without a Palestinian state, all of this is going to start again. And so I'm announcing here a war crimes tribunal, which I intend to set up soon as we've got the election out of the way in Britain. If I'm re-elected, it will take place in Parliament. If I'm not re-elected, it will take place somewhere else. And the first people I'm putting on trial for reasons which you will understand are the journalists, the media, who manufactured the consent for Western governments to massacre, and maim well over 150,000 captives in an open-air prison who've been set upon by their guards and murdered and mutilated. Young children, their mothers, their fathers, their brothers and their sisters. 150,000. 16,000 children alone have been murdered in Gaza, a tiny place, in the last 8 months. But get this, 32,000 Palestinian children have had their limbs amputated. Twice as many as have been killed. It's a very, very big crime, you know. And those who proselytized for it, those who propagandized for it, are to me like Julius Streicher, the publisher of Der Stürmer, the hate sheet of the German Nazi Party, who was hanged by the neck until he was dead by the Nuremberg Tribunal. It's that serious, and it's all coming up over the next 2 hours. It's the mother of all talk shows. Stay tuned. Some of us are old enough to have opposed first time around the idea that our young people, denied a job, denied education that they can afford, will instead be sent out to pick up the trash. Compulsory, sent out to pick up the trash. We won't have it. We won't stand for it. I'll agitate here on the mother of all talk shows against it, and as the leader of the Workers' Party of Britain, I say no. Our workers demand dignity, demand decent wages, demand employment protection. We will not allow jobs to be diluted. We will not allow jobs to be spoiled by free labor, compulsory labor. We call that slavery, you see.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
So here's our poll. Will Israel accept the peace plan? Yes or no? You can vote on my Telegram channel, t.me/George Galloway, on my Twitter handle, my X, on the YouTube community poll, or on the YouTube stream. If you're watching on the YouTube stream, please, 1, subscribe to my channel. 2, share what you're watching with every one of your contacts and friends. Ditto if you're watching on Facebook, on Twitter, on any platform that allows you to do so. If you want to call the show and make your own point on anything that's been said or hasn't been said that you think ought to have been, here are the numbers. It's toll-free in the United States and Canada, +1 844 944 3344. It is free of charge in Britain and in Ireland. It's 0808 196 5522, and the worldwide number is 0044 203 966 2625. And a big welcome, by the way, if you are listening on KPFK. That's 90.7 FM across Los Angeles and Southern California. My colleague, long-time colleague now, Anya Parampil, journalist, political commentator, and crucially, author of CorporateCoup, Venezuela and the End of U.S. Empire, joins us now. Terrific book, Anya. I was very delighted to read it and very happy to see you. We'll talk about the book later if we can, because I want to start with the clear picture in my mind, and I think many people over here on this side of the ocean, that you cannot be serious, as John P. McEnroe used to say. You cannot be serious that this man, Joe Biden, is running for another 4-year term. As I look at him, I mean, it's now moved beyond cringeworthy to pity. And you've got to ask questions about the people that are abusing this elder in this way. How does it look stateside?
It's shocking for me, though in some ways I feel as if Biden is the perfect character to represent our fading empire at this point, which is largely a gerontocracy run by people in their 80s that have no connection to their constituents here in the United States. They're completely disconnected from the people they're supposed to represent, but they're also completely disconnected from the world, and they're just unqualified to be making calls. And to see Biden, that's why I put out this post on X last week that maybe got people a little bit upset, but I was watching the D-Day celebration with Biden and Macron there celebrating the end of fascism and really starting to ask myself, was fascism truly defeated if these are the two left in power, if we're experiencing this war in Gaza that we're watching play out before our eyes on a live stream with, as you correctly point out, an endorsement of the international press and the international press working overtime to, as you say, manufacture consent for what I thought was supposed to be never again. And so for Biden, this figure to be out there barely able to complete his sentences, creating circumstances where memes really, where the biggest news to come out of the D-Day celebration is rumors that the president of the United States soiled his diaper. I mean, that's the world that we're living in. It's very bizarre. And I personally just think it rips the mask off of the whole system that we live under here in the United States, because it's very clear that Biden is not running the show. I mean, we can mock him here all day for his inability to speak or walk or take a cue, but the question we have to ask ourselves is who then is running the country, because it's clearly not him. I would say it's likely his national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, and Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. And if you're going to start trials there in the UK, George, I hope that some of these U.S. officials will be brought before it to answer for their role in these wars.
Has anyone in America noticed the outcome of the European Parliament elections and the crushing humiliation, actually, of Biden, of America's key allies in the recent wars? Did anyone join up the writing that America's empire is visibly declining in the physical form of its president and his rival, by the way, to whom will come, but that the European public are no longer prepared to tolerate politicians who are taking the US line to beggar themselves and to plunge themselves into penury and cold?
Well, in U.S. media, unfortunately, there's pretty much no discussion of the world. So I wouldn't say that anybody's registered, unless we're going to war, that is. There's no discussion of the world or analysis of what's playing out in Europe or anywhere else. If you turn on U.S. media today, it's a reflection really just like Biden himself is of the decay, because all U.S. media are talking about are these trials. There's all of these dozens of trials Trump is facing. Hunter Biden, President Joe Biden's son, also facing trial for and found guilty on this basic charge regarding lying on a form over guns. It's become a complete clown show, more time than any other period I've lived through in the United States. I was telling Max, my husband, the other night, because we turned on CNN just to see what was going on. And I said, for the first time, for more than any other time in my life, it really feels that when we're watching, or that when I'm watching the mainstream media now, that they're just creating this little feedback loop for themselves. And that the rest of the people here are actual people are completely disconnected from it. We have no voice in the media or in government. And so there's no effort to understand the world. No, of course not. I think that's where alternative media is coming in, and it's growing. I think becoming more attractive to younger people than the traditional corporate media, because there is now a movement here to understand what is going on in the rest of the world. Why haven't our media been telling us the truth all of these years? And where, how can they find voices like yours? The fact that you're playing in the United States, I think, is a great sign to the fact that people here are hungry for that perspective, because it's something that they don't actually get.
Now, let's turn, if we may, Anya, to the rival, Zion Dawn. In some regards, partly just because a stopped clock is right twice a day, but also because he may actually be more genuinely American first than the Democratic Party's top brass. But even on the first metric, the stop clock that's right twice a day, it seems likely that in November Trump wins, and the imminent danger of World War III on the Ukrainian front at least runs out of gas. It seems unlikely to me that Trump is going to take America, and therefore the whole world, into a war with Russia. Is that how you see it?
Having covered Trump's first term, including his meeting in Helsinki with Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, during which he was attempting to avoid the situation that we currently find ourselves in, I do have some hope that there is potential under Trump. I mean, he openly speaks about the fact that if he were to come into office, he would actually get on the phone with Putin and speak with our so-called rivals in Russia in order to get peace in Ukraine. And this is something that for some reason is controversial whenever he says that in the United States, which for all of the people who put up their Ukraine flags and claim to care about Ukraine, they certainly don't seem to actually care about whether or not Ukrainian people, human beings, are dying in this war. So Trump, on that front, I do think there's hope. But I know that also comes with then this insane effort by the media and political establishment to undermine him every step of the way. We had Russiagate and record Cold War hysteria revived under Trump's administration in order to prevent any detente with Russia. And that's only insofar as he tries, not even succeeds. And then there are all of these other fronts, particularly in the Middle East, where I don't trust him as much to pursue peace when it comes to Palestine, for example, that the way that I would hope that he does with Russia. It's clear that unfortunately he is in the pocket of the Adelsons, an extremely influential Zionist money here, not to mention his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who not only comes out in front of the war and negotiates a ridiculous peace deal for the Middle East that is all basically just a real estate deal, but then when the wars do come through, he also comes back on the other end and gets the contracts to rebuild, openly talking about wanting to rebuild Gaza. And I would assume that would be to the benefit of the Israelis, not the Palestinian people. Kushner is also someone I saw who was recently winning contracts to rebuild Yugoslavia after the U.S. and NATO destroyed that country throughout the 90s. Just recently, Kushner was boasting about getting to design the coastline of Serbia and help rebuild some of that. So these are the criminal elements that surround Trump. I do believe, yes, I am not someone who just takes this extreme line saying that he's ridiculous and doesn't want peace, because I've seen it up close, his attempts to at least with countries that are our enemies. But I also, I take a look at the reality of the people surrounding him, and I just think have to take a realistic assessment of Trump's limits as well.
Isn't the Russiagate thing now fatally holed below the waterline? After all, we were told that the HunterBiden laptop was Russian disinformation, and now we discover that it was all true, and that the picture the laptop painted of HunterBiden is, if anything, an underestimation of his venality. He is facing, on the face of it, if the judge takes Senator Joe Biden's advice, 25 years in prison for the crime that he has been found guilty of. 3 crimes. 3 guilty verdicts, with more charges in the pipeline. Doesn't that kill the credibility of Russiagate?
Well, it's killed the credibility of the U.S. justice system, that's for sure. Something we should keep in mind here is that the charges relating to Stormy Daniels in New York, which Trump was just found guilty on, this is regarding a payment that his campaign made to her in order to silence her, prevent her from coming forward with claims she had an affair with Trump. This was the only charge to come out of the FBI's Russiagate investigation, a bookkeeping charge that had nothing to do with Russia and Putin and all of these. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's hard to even remember. They had all of these names they would constantly throw out there of all these Russians that Trump was allegedly meeting with during his campaign. None of those people came out in the court charges or the prosecution. Actually, at the end of the day, it was just this porn star, and so they were really reaching, and this is what they came up with. But so yes, that in my view certainly should have delegitimized Russiagate. But then the fact that you have what people clearly see as a political charge brought against the president and then the son of his main rival, it just looks, I think, to most Americans as if this system is just a joke, and that there are competing political factions within our establishment weaponizing the judiciary against each other. But that, of course, no American president who's actually committed a crime that we would like as the American people to see them held accountable for some reason, we never have the resources for that. Never have the resources to question Bush about the lies that got us into the war with Iraq, or Obama's secret drone program, or failure to reverse Bush-era torture. Those big questions are not as hot to our justice system as a prostitute getting paid off and not talking about her relationship with Trump. I mean, it's sad, honestly, as an American to see where we're at in 2024.
Yeah. Sad indeed. Now, your book predicts the end of the U.S. empire. That's quite optimistic. I'm so old, I remember when Chairman Mao described the United States empire as a paper tiger. But it's savaged a lot of people since the 1960s when Mao said that. The decline of the US empire is evident, and we've been discussing it, you and I, in this interview. But the end, what does the end look like in your view?
This book focuses on how the United States has weaponized the international financial system that it controls in order to win its policy objectives around the world. So that's through sanctions and the weaponization of the US dollar primarily. And what I argue, using the case of Venezuela, is that this policy has become so aggressive and so there's no limit on it. For example, the seizure of Venezuelan assets, all $1 billion worth of Venezuelan government assets that were stored in the United States and in the UK, for example, where there was this gold bullion that's still in the Bank of England's vaults. The actual seizure, for the West to carry out the seizure of these assets and essentially steal them, they've held them, siphoned them off to opposition figures, siphoned them off to even the Federal Reserve in New York in some cases. That has gone so far that the rest of the world is kind of turned off from using a Western-based financial system. And I show already that because of sanctions, because we've levied such harsh measures against major players such as Russia, China, Iran, and Venezuela, instead of collapsing, what has happened is these countries have come together and built a world that is, for the first time, able to challenge this London, Brussels, Switzerland, U.S. axis of transatlantic political and economic power that instead is based in the global South, Latin America, Asia, Africa, and the developing world, including Russia and China. And since World War II, we've never actually lived in a world that had the ability to challenge the West's hold on the global economy. But this has actually happened. And so what does it look like? The end of U.S. empire? It looks like Russia and India trading in rubles, that India coming to Russia despite U.S. sanctions that were supposed to crush the oil and gas economy in Russia, and buying buying Russian goods in Russian currency, actually backfiring, US policy backfiring to the point that our so-called enemies are getting stronger. And this has not only happened with Russia, it's in some ways happened with Venezuela, though there was so much suffering there because of their dependence on the US for so long when those sanctions initially came down. Instead of crushing their economy, the sanctions actually forced Venezuela to evolve. And this is a remarkable time to live in as a human being on this planet, because I think that those of us in the UK and the United States will actually be much freer and happier and more will prosper far more once this transnational elite that has abused all of us in order to then subjugate the rest of the planet is overthrown, and they're weaker. They're weaker as a result of what the rest of the world is doing. And so I think it's up to us in the West to be aware of this changing world and our place in it. And I like to take an optimistic look and say that we can all play our part in this role. I heard in your monologue talking about how the UK still can come forward with what it brings to the table in this modern world in order to attract business and exchange. I think all of us have to function that way in the future instead of relying on this economy of death. That's what we're living through. That's what's occupying us currently. That's why we have to fight these wars whether it's in Palestine or in Ukraine. And so, yeah, I would like to take an optimistic view of this, because like you, I'm a patriot. I believe in my country. I don't want it to suffer. I don't want the people here to live in despair in this new world, where the empire falls. No, I actually want to move forward and see how we can be better in the future. We can be better off, I believe, in the future if we kind of accept reality.
Amen. Best of luck with the book, Anya. It's a cracking read. I hope everyone watching orders it. Thank you for joining us, as always. Anya Parampil, journalist, political commentator, author of CorporateCoup, Venezuela, and the End of U.S. Empire. I've read it. It's outstanding. I'll be back in 1 minute, 60 seconds. Count them. There are some key metrics that very few people have yet fully grasped. This show attracts an audience exponentially higher. I mean, like more multiples than I could calculate. The written press, behind paywalls, which nobody buys. If you've ever recently been in a supermarket and seen the unsold copies, you already know nobody buys newspapers, and nobody much is prepared to pay a paywall to read stuff that they know intrinsically, instinctively. They know that they're being lied to, that it's propaganda, that the owner is not even in the business of actually selling. He's in the declining business of influencing opinion in the country for his, maybe not often her, political point of view. So first of all, why would I want to be appearing on television channels whose audience is minuscule, except when I'm on it? You think I'm boasting? Take a look at the metrics. Take a look. When I'm on, when I'm not on, you'll see the difference in the audiences. So why should I help them get audiences? We need to be our own media, and increasingly we are.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Now, don't forget the MOATS podcast. It's charting in over 100 countries around the world. It's been number 1 this week in both Nigeria and Zimbabwe on Apple. You can download the MOATS podcast by scanning the QR code on your screen. Now, let's go straight to the phones. Fidel is in Welland, Hatfield, and wants to talk about British politics. Go ahead, Fidel.
Salutations, Commandante.
Nice to hear from you.
I've joined the Workers' Party, and my friends have joined the Workers' Party. I've been following you since TalkSport.
Excellent.
Yes, and you are too,
Excellent.
sir. And I don't use that word, sir, very often.
Thank you.
But you are, sir.
Thank you.
Question is, two
Thank you, much
two
obliged.
questions. The first one is, I joined the Workers' Party. One of my good friends, well, a few of my friends have joined and all, since I've showed them what really, what socialism really is all about. And when I showed them the manifesto, which is a breath of fresh air, an absolute breath of fresh air, one of them actually said to me, why are you joining the Workers' Party? You're retired now, you're a pensioner. I said, two reasons. First of all, I want a government that's going to govern this country rightfully and fully and properly. Second, I'm worried about my grandchildren, our grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and the rest. I said they won't have a home, they won't be get a flat, they'll all be working at McDonald's, saying have a nice day. I said, I'm worried about them. Not just mine, yours as well, and everybody in this country's children and grandchildren. And the second question is, George, I live in an area where we've got no Workers' Party candidate, which is very sad at the moment. Probably next time round, hopefully, inshallah. The thing is, we've got both cheeks of the same bum, but we have got a reform candidate here, which is from nowhere, but we don't know. But, what do you think I should do? Do I lose? Well, they're all near
Well, I'd
anyway,
vote for
do I lose?
anybody other... I mean, obviously it would be great. Thanks for all your kind words, by the way. It would be great if we had a Workers' Party candidate everywhere, but we don't. So my advice to people is vote for anybody but Labour or the Conservative Party. Whoever you vote for, don't vote for either of those. So that's my extant advice to everybody. If you vote for Labour or Tory, you've got blood on your hands, and you don't want that, really. Thanks, brilliant call. Fidel. George is in Cyprus on the EU elections. Go ahead, George.
Good evening, George. Long-time follower, first-time caller, and a big fan.
Thanks.
Last Sunday,
Thanks, George.
as you know, we had the European elections, and here in Cyprus, in parallel with that, we also had the local elections. The turnout was about 50%. But one of the shocks, which shocked certainly the establishment parties here, was the fact that third place, with nearly 20% of the vote, was taken by an unknown 24-year-old TikToker, young man by the name of Phidias. So it'd come to be known as the Phidias phenomenon. And he's got a seat now in the European Parliament. The surprising, or maybe not surprising thing, is that in fact he had no policies and no formal manifesto. So, and the demographic, obviously because of his age, we're talking about the first-time voters, the 18-year-olds, up to 25, 30. The establishment is still reeling from that, and the other thing, which again maybe is not surprising, number 4 behind him was Ilam, which is the local far-right nationalist party, in fact the sister party to the Golden Dawn of Greece. So we're seeing here the same pattern is occurring all over Europe, a shift towards the right. The most encouraging thing is that we're now seeing younger people interested in voting. The electoral...
That's a fascinating story, George. We're seeing a shift to the right. We're seeing a shift to anybody who is an alternative. A TikToker comes in third place, wins a seat in the European Parliament. These kind of phenomena, they might have been called by Gramsci, if he'd known about TikTok all those decades ago, as symptoms of morbidity. They are symptoms of the dying of a political and economic system. So that TikToker who has no manifesto, has no policies, but is just against the establishment can get 20% of the vote in a highly political place like Cyprus. Now, it's inconceivable that these morbidity symptoms are not going to be felt here in Britain, and they're going to be felt in Britain in the general election. That's why I'm certain that the resurgent Reform Party led by Nigel Farage is going to do very, very well. And there's still more than 3 weeks to go in the British general election. It's not inconceivable that he actually could be the top dog in the election running by the time we get to the 4th of July. Sections of the media are doing their best to promote that. Idiots from the so-called left are pelting him with things, soft and hard. It's a milkshake yesterday, it's an iron rivet today. What will it be tomorrow, God forbid? The reality is these idiots are putting Farage's poll up, not down. They are bolstering, underpinning his vote. And of course, it may be possible that they're not left-wing idiots. After all, they're useful idiots for other forces that may be at work in this. One way or another, George, we're living in very dramatically changing times. And it's unlikely that Britain and the United States will be accepted from this new politics that has swept Europe. Thanks very much for that politics lesson from beautiful Cyprus. YouTube comments, History Discover says, please don't give us a Native American-style Indian reservation, but one state, equal rights for all, with return of all Palestinian refugees. Amen. And anti-Zionist Israeli says, never again is not confined to one story or one group. It's a testament to the resilience and unity of all who have faced oppression, discrimination and violence. It's a pledge that binds us together. And Anthony Wedgwood says, amazing how easy it is to trick the working class into voting for you under the guise of nationalism, despite having no real policies that benefit the working class. Farage is just a right-wing Tory. On the line, where Tories are not welcome, is the great city of Liverpool, where Alan has a view on the EU elections. Go ahead, Alan.
Not about EU elections, certainly about the economy, George. I know I have to be very quick. Basically, I just think we've lost the central lesson concerning debt. At the end of the Second World War, both Britain and Germany, Britain and America had massive debts of 100% GNP. And in the case of America, I've got their figures. By 1960, it was down to 25%. Now, what happened at the end of the war is that originally they went in for austerity figures. They realized it was having a depressive effect. And so they introduced the interstate highway program and the GI program for education. So you had hundreds of thousands of science and engineering graduates being produced. You had an interstate road system and other projects as well. And the debt was basically quartered. Now, there's a difference between that, the sort of debt the Americans had and how they got rid of it, and what they have now. The problem is that most of their debt is corporate giveaways to the top, 1%, billionaire class, endless sort of cuts to improve the financial situation of the elites. And of course, the biggest factor, of course, is military spending. And none of that is productive. It doesn't stimulate anything within the economy. It doesn't lay down any foundations. That's why that type of debt is dangerous. Having said that, I hope you interview Professor Michael Hudson on this, and his associate, because I believe you know him, his associate Stephanie Kelton. She wrote an excellent book called The Deficit Myth. She belongs to the new monetary school of economists, and she's very impressive. And basically, she says, if you've got a fiat currency, i.e., we're not members of the euro or the like, then you can basically spend what you need to spend in the economy up to a point where it starts coming against the upper capacity of the economy. If you don't do that, you're just losing out massive amounts of economic output unnecessarily. But the present dogma is this household budget model, which is completely fallacious, because most economists, even they have accepted that, when a family spends money, it doesn't affect its own income, but a state spending does, and unfortunately, all the parties are afflicted by this. Now, I think a new monetary policy is the way to go. It should be looked at, but certainly austerity needs to be nailed down into the ground. If banks stop, as a result of an economic shock, stop lending, if people stop borrowing, if people and companies stop spending, then you get a depressionary spiral. And the last thing you need to do is to make it worse by government cuts called austerity in inverted commas. Even in America and US, we see the example.
Good point, Alan. We are looking at this new monetary policy. Some of my colleagues are big supporters of it. Steve Hall, Chris Williamson. We are looking at it, and I promise Michael Hudson's one of my favorite guests. We will get him on soon. Let me squeeze in Scott in Manhattan on my War Crimes Tribunal idea. Go ahead, Scott.
Scott, this is, George, I'm sorry. This is Scott from Manhattan. And I was on Have It Out with Galloway a couple episodes ago talking about my $20 trillion a year global wealth tax design, the Woodford, Paula Alessandra, de Costier, Cabot Lodge global wealth tax design. But what I wanted to call right now to heap praise on you is for this idea of a war crimes tribunal, and the reason is that these political leaders like Obama, like George W. Bush, like the media, like you compared them to Julius Streicher, which was I independently thought of that myself. These people have the blood of millions and millions of people on their hands. And I was wondering, and if you think back, one of the most powerful political moments of the last 20 years or whatever was the Goldstone Tribunal in Israel, where Israel intelligence service went so bonkers that they blackmailed Goldstone to retract the findings of the tribunal. And I just watched a 90-minute session with Norman Finkelstein, where he was talking about how Goldstone, the theory is that they blackmailed his daughter or something like that to retract this. But I think, what would your thoughts be? I got a two-part question. First off, what would be your thoughts of making this war crimes tribunal and crimes against humanity? I don't think it should just be called a war crimes tribunal. I think it should be called a crimes against humanity tribunal. What would you think of making that the flagship plank of the Workers' Party platform? And then, as a side question,
I'm Scott. No, Scott, there's no time. There's no time for a second one. You'll need to call back on Sunday with your second one, because I have to hit my marks now, you see, because we are on KPFK 90.7 FM right across Los Angeles and Southern California. So I don't have the same license to go beyond my half hours and my hours. But I want to thank you for your welcome of my War Crimes Tribunal issue. You can call it many things, and there may be many tribunals. I'm going to take care of the media War Crimes Tribunal. Others can take care of the politicians and other aspects of these crimes against humanity. But don't think any of you journalists are going to escape lightly. Coming up after this break is Steve Sosebee. Steve Sosebee is the founder of the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund and Palestine for Gaza's children. It's going to be a very important interview, so don't go anywhere at all. I'll be leading scores of parliamentary candidates and potentially hundreds. And of course, if they were all to be elected, I might have enough support to become the Prime Minister. But unfortunately, in this country, we don't elect the Prime Minister directly. If we did, we might be better off. We've got a Prime Minister for whom nobody at all voted at any level anywhere. He was not even elected by his own members of Parliament. But our Prime Minister is appointed by the King, if he's still there, on the basis that they can command the loyalty, the majority loyalty on the floor of the House, which would be of the order of 325, 326 MPs. It's exceedingly unlikely that that will ever be me. What I'm concentrating on trying to achieve is that it is not clear who has got the majority of seats, who will be able to form a government. In other words, I'm trying to bring about a hung parliament in which people like me, like you, will have some negotiating room, will have some trading room to give our vote for PM to the person who acknowledges and accepts and is ready to implement some of the key demands that we have, the foremost of which is peace, an end to Britain's role as a perpetual warmonger, as the tail of the American war dog. But there are many other demands that we have also. I am running to be Prime Minister in the sense that I will be leading a long, long list of Workers' Party parliamentary candidates. And if they were all to be elected, well, then we'd be flying.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Will Israel accept the peace plan? Yes or no? You can vote on my Telegram, t.me/George Galloway, or on my X, or on the YouTube community poll, or on the YouTube stream. It's pretty overwhelming, no. And that's interesting, given that on the face of it, the answer should be yes. Shows how much trust people have in the Israeli government and its political system. Phone calls are toll-free in the US and Canada, +1 844 944 3344. Free of charge in the UK and Ireland, 08081 965522. And the worldwide number is 0044 203 966 2625. Steve Sosebee is a hero, a people's hero. He has done remarkable work for many years for the Palestinian children. And given the figures I gave you earlier, 16,000 Palestinian children murdered in the course of this latest chapter, that's all it is, latest chapter in the mass murder of Palestinians. The 32,000 Palestinian children amputated in the course of this last 8 months. Amputated. Gaza is the amputation capital of the world. For the rest of the lives of these children, you'll be able to see them if they survive the current chapter of the war on children in Palestine. That is. Steve Sosebee, a hero, is welcome here on the mother of all talk shows. Steve, it's almost beyond imagination what the Palestinian children have gone through. I've been in this cause for 50 years, but even I have never seen anything like this. And that's before we even get into calculating the impact on the mental health the psychological health of those who didn't get killed and maybe didn't even get amputated, but who saw all of those who did, maybe helped dig them out of the rubble, maybe helped carry their bodies and so on. This is major league, isn't it? In a small population, 2.3 million people in a tiny area. I don't think the world's ever seen anything like this.
No, it's unprecedented in modern history to witness a genocide. Every day you wake up and see new massacres, new deaths, destruction, suffering, hardship, and it continues on for months and months. The world sees it. The entire global community is aware of what's happening. It's not something that's happening in the dark or in the shadows. It's quite obvious and clear to everyone, and yet it continues. And I'm glad you mentioned the mental health component here, because when we talk about having to rebuild Gaza, and we're committed to it, we're determined to do it. Gaza will be rebuilt, but we have to rebuild the hearts and minds of the people there as well. Not only what they've experienced since October, and before that, as you said, this is just a chapter. It's been going on for years and decades and generations. The whole entire population, the 2.3 million people of Gaza, every single one of them is traumatized. Every single one of them has experienced something that none of us can possibly imagine as human beings, witnessing so much death and destruction and suffering and hunger and brutality and hopelessness every single day. We've never seen that in modern history. Those people, and no, I think, captive population have ever gone through this, at least not in modern history. And it's our responsibility to rebuild and repair not only Gaza as a physical structure, but the people there who deserve the love and compassion and support and solidarity of the international community, that we stand with them, that the murder and killing of the 16,000 children and the 32,000 amputees and the millions of now mentally suffering people there, it's our responsibility. They've been treated as if their lives don't matter. The entire international community, all of us have blood on our hands, whether you're American, British, from any place on this planet. Nearly every country has some culpability in this genocide. And it's up to us as individuals and as citizens of free societies and as decent, peace-loving, justice-loving people to stand up and say enough and to serve the Palestinian people, particularly the children there, for as long as it takes to heal their wounds and repair what's been done.
Perfectly put, Steve. Before I go on to what it is that you're doing and how people can help you, how do you account for the fact? Because there are not many options as answers to this question. How do you account for the fact that in the modern age, where everyone could see it happening in real time, without even having to switch the television on, you can watch it on your telephone, and many millions of people do. How do you account for the fact that they got away with it, that Israel got away with it, that the Western governments that made it possible for Israel to get away with it? How is it possible for all these children to be slaughtered, all these children to be mutilated and maimed, yet nobody lifted a hand to stop it? How do you account for that?
Well, I'm George, you're far more educated and smarter than me on how politics works, but I can just give you my assessment and my kind of view, which is they've gotten away with it for now, but we've seen a groundswell of support all over the world. You've seen it even in the United States, where they've done their best to kind of dehumanize Arabs and Muslims and Palestinians for generations and generations, making it possible to kill their children graphically and openly, as they have been doing. And yet now you see a groundswell of support that we've never seen before. I've been doing this for more than 30 years, serving the Palestinian people and the Palestinian cause in a positive way. I've never seen the amount of support, particularly in the young people. And I think it's a generational issue. As soon as this older generation is out of power, the younger generation coming in to replace them are far more plugged into the realities and the truth of what's happening globally and in Palestine, and will be making significant policy changes when it comes to the Middle East. Now, that doesn't have much bearing on what's happening today or changing the lives of the children and the people of Gaza today, but I am optimistic that in the long run, justice will prevail. Now, to get to that point, we have to help our brothers and sisters in Gaza to survive. This is an existential crisis for them, and that's where the real challenge and the struggle exists today. it is questionable. I think there's a disconnect between governments and between the people, and that even in democracies that happens. You have in the United States, where I'm from, you have a strong disconnect between the actual people in power and those who actually, and then common citizens or people in the streets. And that disconnect is probably going to cost President Biden the election. I think that the young people in this country, in the United States, are not going to come out with any kind of enthusiasm and passion to the polls in November to support him. And that's mainly because of his position on this crisis in Gaza, on this genocide, that he has continued to provide the 2,000-pound bombs, which are killing dozens and dozens of people every time they drop one. And I think that's a positive thing, not positive in the sense that, the alternative is even a worse candidate, but that there is accountability for decisions that are being made that support unlawful, unethical, and immoral decisions and policies that cost, as you said, 16,000 children their lives. And I'm happy for that, because that will start, hopefully, to impact people in the future, politicians, to make the right decision and do what's right for the long term and even in the short term, and not just think about their cynical political positions or power, how they can stay in power in the short term.
Now, tell us in a nutshell, if you would, Steve, what HEAL is doing and how our audience can help you.
Thank you, George. So HealPalestine was set up in January of this year. I started PCRF, my previous organization, back in the first Intifada, and that was really dedicated to helping deal with what the conditions were like during those last 30 years, and they were bad enough. We've seen plenty of bombings in Gaza. We've seen much destruction, much suffering, not only in Gaza, in the West Bank for our Palestinian brothers and sisters in the refugee camps in Syria and Lebanon and Jordan. And we were working very hard to address their needs. But in January, I decided to start another organization which would have even a more holistic and effective impact on the lives, particularly during this genocide. And what HEAL stands for, it's mainly health, education, aid, and leadership. And those first three areas are pretty straightforward. In health, we have 12 injured kids right now being treated outside, many more coming for free care they can't get inside. That's just a drop in the bucket. But what it does is it empowers our communities abroad as well to take care of them, to be involved. One of the main challenges we face as a community, in my opinion, is not only staying focused in ways that we can be involved, because as you probably know, George, you're one of the main activists on this issue. One of the main challenges we face is that people become very discouraged. They become very hopeless. And that's the biggest, I think, risk that we face, is that people either get burned out or they feel they don't have a role in having a positive impact on this issue. By bringing injured kids to the U.S., not only do we get, or anywhere, we'd love to send them to the U.K., we get it for free care. So we get their treatment for free care. So I think that shows also there's a high level of solidarity, even within the power structures of the medical institutions in the U.S. They're willing to treat these kids because they understand what's going on. It gives our communities a chance to be involved and to be active and to stay connected to the struggle in a way that is hopefully empowering them and motivating them to continue. So bringing kids here, we also are just opened 2 days ago a brand new field hospital in Gaza in Mawasi, Han Yunis, which is one of the last so-called safe areas in Gaza. There are no safe areas, as you know. And we're now providing hundreds and eventually thousands of people care every single day in that field hospital. We're feeding nearly 5,000 people a day. We had to move our kitchen from Rafah to Deir al-Balah, but we're opening more kitchens and hopefully feeding thousands of more people a day. We run a mental health program for traumatized children in Gaza. We have a mental health team there that are addressing their needs either through group therapy or individual one-on-one therapy, not only for the children, but for the mothers. We're doing a campaign now for the many, many mothers who are giving birth and their husbands are dead, and how depressed they are and how they don't want to even have their children just because they feel so hopeless. We're doing a program for them, special program. In addition, we're running and building makeshift classrooms for children. As you know, since October, not a single child, whether from preschool up to graduate school, has attended a single course or class in Gaza. And the long-term impact that that's going to have on the society of Gaza is not to be understated, because it's going to be extreme to get these kids back in the classrooms. I was just talking to a host family of an 11-year-old girl we have in the U.S. now who had her leg blown off. She's above knee amputee, 11-year-old girl, beautiful child. Her father was killed in the bombing of her home. And the host mom was telling me this 11-year-old girl is supposed to be going into 6th grade. She can't add double digits. That's the impact that the occupation and the siege and the closure of schools has had on children. That's just one example. And it's even more extreme in many other cases. So we're running makeshift classrooms. But our last area of work, the L in HEAL, stands for leadership and mentorship. And this is in the post-genocidal phase. And by the way, George, I never, in my 30 plus years of serving the Palestinian cause in a positive way, I never thought I would ever utter the words post-genocidal phase. But here we are in a current genocide in Gaza. When this genocide is over, and it will be over one day, God willing, we have to rebuild. And one of the areas that we're going to really focus on is taking responsibility for these thousands, tens of thousands of orphans, tens of thousands of permanently disabled children, and helping to rebuild their lives, not in the short term, but in the long term, taking responsibility for them and connecting them to people all over the world who can help guide and mentor them and open doors for them, give them a sense of self-esteem and also opportunities in their life to become independent, not to become waiting for their government or for any NGO or any organization, charity, to feed them and clothe them and house them. We know that Gaza people have are very intelligent, they're hardworking, that they have just they need the opportunity to rebuild their lives and rebuild their country, and we're going to help give them that. This is going to be a very unique leadership program, and we have great optimism that once this genocide is over and we can start rebuilding, that it's going to have a tremendous impact, not only on the lives of the tens of thousands of kids in Gaza, but also on our communities all over the world who are looking and searching and desperate for ways that they can contribute and be a part of serving the rebuilding of Gaza, especially the hearts and minds of these children.
I'm sure I speak for everyone, Steve. That is enormously impressive, both your record of work and your ambitions now for this incredible that we're both saying this phrase, the post-genocidal period that we have been through. Who'd have thunk it? Men of our age, talking about a post-genocidal period. What's your website? How do people support you?
Thank you, George. It's HealPalestine.org. That's our website. They can reach out to us. They can contact us through volunteer at HealPalestine.org. If they're looking to get involved and be involved in our work, we have medical teams going over to our field hospital. We're bringing more injured kids out for treatment they can't get otherwise. There's a great amount of opportunities for people to get involved. So if you're looking for a way to serve the children of Gaza, please reach out to us and we'll get you involved. And one more thing I just want to say, George, first of all, I appreciate your work. You're a hero of mine and of many people for your stance and your strength and your courage, speaking the truth in such an articulate manner. But in addition to that, I'm just an activist. I found a way to do something to serve Palestine 30 plus years ago, and I'm very proud to be able to do it. And you mentioned at the beginning of the show, I'm a hero. I'm not a hero. The people that are heroes are the doctors and nurses in Gaza, the ambulance drivers, the people who are serving on the ground every single day, their people and their cause for justice and for freedom. I'm just a soldier in a positive way for this cause. I'm honored to do it, but I'm an American and I have blood on my hands. And it's the least that I can do, or any American can do, is stand up and serve the Palestinian people. And whatever we do, if we save 1,000 lives or 1,000,000 lives, it's not enough to what our responsibility holds as Americans to this cause and to these people. So please don't call me a hero.
Well, I'll tell you what, Steve. If you're a soldier, you're definitely an officer and a gentleman. Thanks for being with us on the show tonight. Everyone should get behind Heal Palestine. Now, it's break time, but then the show's all yours. Your calls right up to the hour. Stay tuned. Now, you're used to telephoning questions into me on my various shows. I've spoken with thousands of you over the last couple of decades. But now, on my new show, you get a chance to appear in person on a video wall. It would be good to see what you looked like as well as what you sounded like. It's very simple to get on my show. Go to www.haveitoutwithgalloway.com. Just register there. We'll get you on the television with me. Come and have a go if you think you're hard enough.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Do join me on my habitatwithgalloway.com. I promise you, you'll enjoy the experience. Now, the numbers, US and Canada, +1 844 944 3344. It's toll free. Free of charge too in the UK and Ireland, 0808 196 5522. And the worldwide number, 44203 966 2625. Let's stay in England. Go to Tessa in Suffolk on Hamas. What would you like to say, Tessa?
Hi, George. Good evening. I'm just reeling from your last guest. I'm just so amazed with the work
wasn't he amazing?
Doing.
Wasn't he amazing?
I was
knocked out by it myself.
I feel like volunteering. Anyway, I think I heard on your show, I think it was Scott Ritter, mentioned that the Hamas was funded initially by Israel. Is that true, or did I hear that wrong?
No, you didn't hear it wrong, but it probably wasn't initially. But it's undoubtedly true that Netanyahu himself many times urged Qatar to continue and indeed step up its funding of Hamas, because Hamas was a rival to President Arafat and the mainstream PLO, and it helped to divide the Palestinian House, to have two people at each other's throats, at loggerheads at least. It helped that the rivalry between the Islamic tendencies within the resistance were at loggerheads with the Arab nationalist, leftist, socialist tendencies. But that doesn't mean that Hamas are in any way clients of or bought and paid for by Israel. That's obviously not true. But I was there in the Palestinian cause long before there was anything called Hamas, when there was only the Arab nationalist and leftist tendencies, all within the PLO. There was no Hamas until less than 40 years ago, and I've been in this cause for 50 years. And I can say that I was often in Gaza before Hamas existed. And I saw them come into existence. And I saw the way in which Islamic organizations, medical, social, cultural, and so on, were allowed to operate in Gaza when it was entirely occupied territory, when there was Israeli checkpoints and watchtowers on every single street in Gaza. I saw how these organizations, who later became Hamas, were, if not encouraged, definitely allowed to operate when, if anyone had stepped out with a PLO vehicle, it would have been blown away. And the prisons and the graveyards, indeed, were full of the people of Fatah, of the PFLP, and the other organizations that existed at that time. But the Islamic trends were, if not encouraged, definitely allowed to operate. However, I do reiterate, that does not mean that Hamas in 2024 are in any sense clients of or tools of Israel. That's very definitely not true. Now the prisons are full of Hamas people. The graveyards are full of Hamas people. Hamas are the leading force in the Palestinian resistance movement in Gaza. They're not the only ones. The Fatah is still there, PFLP still there. There are even other Islamic organizations that are now playing a significant role in the Palestinian resistance in Gaza. But Hamas are very definitely the leading force. And that's the way the West wanted it in the beginning. Perhaps not quite so much now. Thanks, Tessa. David is in England, in Swindon, on Sanuk and Israel. Sunak.
Yeah. I got the name wrong then. And,
go ahead, David.
Yeah. The continuing saga of the returning early from the D-Day celebrations. It just gets worse because tonight they actually broadcast. He left the D-Day forum. He left the D-Day celebrations early to record an ITN interview. Okay, which was 6 days ago. So why was it so urgent? Yeah. Now, if you watch that, I recommend anybody watch YouTube, that interview. When he comes into the room, he runs in late, apologising as if he's late for a Chelsea dinner party, saying, oh, the celebrations overran. I'm sorry I'm late. And the guy was just knocked back. If you look at the interviewee's face, he can't believe what he's saying. So, and the interviewer said, did
total
you see
disrespect, David. It's total disrespect. Sunak left early. Biden did it in his trousers. I mean, this is an allegory of the sheer degeneracy of the Western political class, isn't it? Quite apart from the fact that Germany was there, but Russia wasn't there, and Zelensky, who's kept in power by a phalanx of fascists, he was there, but Russia wasn't there. The whole thing is degenerate, an insult to the heroes and the martyrs of D-Day 1944. Don't you think?
Absolutely, yeah. But that, if you like, that was just my first point. The second point is, I think I'm having a deja vu Groundhog Day with this, the peace process. We seem to, Blinken stands up again and says, oh, Hamas are rejecting it. Who actually put that plan together? America presented it at the United Nations, you know, and as soon as it comes out, somebody says, oh, we don't agree with it. You know, and then it's like pass the parcel. But we heard this 2 months ago. Oh, Hamas don't agree with it. Israel don't agree with it. Israel will never agree to it. They won't agree to anything past the first.
No, and in a way, David, isn't it the case that if the fighting stops, Netanyahu falls, and if Netanyahu falls, he's marched off to jail? Isn't that the central conundrum here?
Absolutely, yeah. That's why they'll do anything to delay. As soon as it mentions Israeli forces pulling out, it's null and void. As soon as that American envoy to the United Nations in the first phase said Israel will remain in Gaza in the first phase, I knew it was dead in the water. So
yeah, absolutely. David, thanks for a great call. Global Prosperity says, the more I look deep inside the US, the more I feel disappointed. The more I know about China, the more I am inspired. That's why they spend billions of dollars on anti-China propaganda. You got it in one. Stinky Pinky said, I loved Anya's interview. If we had voices like hers and Max's on the corporate media, I think the USA public would actually listen in to watch real news reporting. Max Blumenthal and Anya Parampil, a wonderful power couple in American political journalism, and I hope one day in American politics, are two of the most outstanding Americans. And the grey zone is the place to be. Yolanda Carden says, Anya gives a balanced, informed assessment of US government shenanigans. George Galloway has excellent guests and is the major strength of his mother of all talk shows. Yeah, but I couldn't do it without my good wife Gayatri, and she's coming up very shortly. Lots of love actually for Anya in the chat. Let's go to my hometown of Dundee, where Duncan wants to talk about Ukraine. Told you this is the global university of the airwaves. Welcome, Duncan.
Thank you, George. Thank you for taking my call. I've got a question about Ukraine. I noticed when the the situation kicked off, the West put a lot of red lines down that they wouldn't supply, whether it's depleted uranium shells or Leopard tanks or ATACMS, and then one red line after another's fallen, and now they're at the point where they're saying that the Ukrainians can fire into Russia proper, which they've done, and there's been people killed. And I noticed recently, Peskov, the spokesman over there in Russia, Lavrov, and Putin himself has said this will not go unanswered, and they've stated that they will start supplying weapons to people who are fighting or have a beef with the West. And these people who will receive them don't necessarily have to be a country nor be a recognized state. So my question is Putin bluffing? Or if he's not bluffing, who's going to receive these weapons?
Well, Stalin wasn't Stalin when he told the Beast of Berlin, and Putin isn't stalling or bluffing either. And it's already started, Duncan. Great call, by the way. Proud of you. The Cuban arrival today in Havana of Russian nuclear super submarine armed with nuclear weapons and a major frigate convoy has arrived in Cuba, and you can speculate as to whether they'll be unloading their weapons in Cuba. And my speculation would be that they will, and why should they not? If the United States is nuclear arming all around Russia's borders, why wouldn't Russia do the same where it had allies who were prepared to cite those weapons on their soil? Cuba is definitely one. Nicaragua is definitely another. Maybe Venezuela would also be another. And there are other countries too that the Russians, seems obvious to me, the Russians will be looking to arm. And as you say, they don't even have to be states recognized by the United States. Why would they have to be? So anybody who thinks that Putin is bluffing is obviously not a very good poker player. And I would advise them to pay more attention. Great call, Dunk. On the line is a legend. It's Simon in Florida with some important news. Simon, go ahead.
Greetings to you, Mr. Galloway, and to your worldwide audience. And this truly is a news story that's going to affect international developments for the entire planet. In the United Nations General Assembly, there occurred last week, and it went almost entirely unnoticed as all the diplomats were fighting over the text of the ceasefire resolution from Gaza, the UNSC Resolution 2735. As that was being negotiated, the Chinese proposed making June 10th a day of recognition for international dialogue between civilizations. Seemed very philosophical. Everyone's attention was elsewhere. But they subtly got over half the countries in the world co-sponsor it. So it was guaranteed to pass. At which point, the Europeans and the Americans, otherwise known as the Gulf Billion, had to suddenly decide, is this worth fighting over? We've got this Gaza thing we really need to focus on. So, yeah, the Chinese want this philosophical thing, whatever, right? As the Beijing Review explained, the text of the draft resolution included the summary points of the 28,000-word Chinese proposal for the Global Civilizational Initiative that I did a 90-minute documentary on shortly after it came out. I regarded that as being so significant. What then happened is the motion was passed unanimously, and having only been able to get a few countries one by one to recognize the merits of the Global Civilizational Initiative, which is President Xi's centerpiece of his presidency of China to date, just so people understand how significant he regards this, right? The Beijing Review then explained that as a consequence of the world unanimously adopting the summary of the Global Civilization Initiative, as far as the Chinese government was concerned, that meant that every single country in the world had signed up to that proposal. It is the greatest diplomatic feat for the Chinese since Kissinger went to Peking, and it's the greatest event in the United Nations General Assembly since the Unifying for Peace resolution was jammed through whilst the Russians, in a spat, were boycotting attendance at the United Nations. It's that significant.
Wow. Amazing. Now listen, have you got anything on Macron? Where do you think he stands now? That his presidency looks to be doomed to me.
He has given the most astonishing speech today. I watched it in its entirety, and importantly, the questions and answers. Now, the French intelligentsia and political elite have universally condemned his speech as being too long, too boring, too repetitive, irrelevant, not addressing the kind of homestead issues that really the French electorate seem to be focused on, along with immigration. And yet the press were extremely aggressive and not respectful of his position as head of state at all in the subsequent questions and answers. Now, many might have supposed, because he does tend to have a little bit of a short temper, as one would imagine with his short stature, and he kept his cool, but in response to a couple of questions, went so far as to say that if they were to vote the electorate for the coalition of the left that is formed, which is called Left Unity, and have rejected approaches from his centre-right party, then they would be, and this is in his words, electing an anti-Semite, and that would have to be on their conscience if they were to give them what he estimated was a possibility of 300 out of 577 seats. He then went so far as to suggest that if alternatively they voted for the national rally, which obviously is led by MarineLePen and her young deputy, that they would be voting for no state pension of any amount at any age, and to never be able to get a mortgage again because the French credit rating would collapse so much, the banks would go insolvent and they wouldn't be able to grant mortgages. So it literally was vote for anti-Semitism or vote for no mortgages and no pensions if you vote for anybody else other than me. Completely insane.
Well, we'll see how that works out for him, Simon. Keep an eye on it for us, will you? The election is on the 30th of June, the first round of it anyway. Simon, what a wise man he is in Florida. Dina is in South Wales. He wants to talk about Palestine. Go ahead, Dina.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, George.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How can I help you, Dina?
Barakallah fik. So I'm sure you're aware that the CEO of Medical Aid for Palestinians, which we have long supported, is none other than Melanie Ward, who happens to now be canvassing for Keir Starmer's Labour Zionist Party. And I thank you for bringing...
She's a candidate, I think, isn't she?
She is.
Isn't she a candidate?
Yes, indeed. So we have withdrawn all funds to the charity itself. We have boycotted. We have spread the message as far as possible in that this is what's going on. And thank you so much for bringing Steve onto the show, because that's another channel for us to divert funds.
He was great, wasn't he?
Absolutely fantastic as to what he's doing. And if you ever speak to any doctor that's on the ground or nurse that's on the ground, they will all tell you the minute they've left Gaza, the minute they left Rafah or the West Bank or anywhere in Palestine, they would go back there in a heartbeat, because they know that their job is there to help save as much as possible. So that can only speak volumes.
I mean, Steve was right. I mean, he wasn't right in minimizing the importance of himself, but he was right in talking about these heroes. I mean, the Palestinians can't get out of Gaza, but we've actually got highly qualified surgeons, doctors, nurses, technicians from all over the world desperately trying to get in to Gaza with all the attendant risks, because their vocation is so powerful, and what they've seen on their phones, on their screens, so horrifying, that they feel a moral imperative to go there. And in fact, they're waiting at the border, desperate to get in. Truly amazing. Dina, thanks for that wonderful call. Now remember, the MOATS podcast is charting in over 100 countries and has been #1 in Nigeria and Zimbabwe just this very week. And you can download it on the QR code on your screen right now. Let me go to Seamus in Enfield, who has a solution. Solution to what? I don't know, but I'm all ears. Seamus, what would you like to say?
I haven't got a solution, George. What it is I've been having a bit of problems getting sorted with council tax on one thing and another last year. And I found out that the council is not actually being run by the council. It's been run by a solutions company called Liberata. I don't know if it's okay to use their name online with your show or not. But
well, don't defame them. That's all I'll say.
No, I'm not defaming them now, but they don't have a clue. Basically, it's like this. They have control of everything. When your DHP payment runs out, if your DHP payment runs out, then that's it. You've got nothing from January until April, and puts you in rent arrears with your landlord, which basically you could clock up maybe £2,000, £3,000, £4,000 worth of rent arrears. But these people, solutions company, who charge £30 million a year, they run one borough council, they still get their money. And why is that? Why should that be allowed?
Well, look, Seamus, thanks for the call. It's a local issue, but no doubt an important one in your area. Liberta are not available for comment tonight, but of course they are welcome to come on the show and answer the points that you made. Now next, it's my own good wife, Gayatri, live. What's rattling, Gayatri?
Our new guest tonight, Steve. What a brilliant guest, George. His passion and dedication speaks volume. I take my hat off to this guy, Ian from Arbroath in Scotland. And in response to your war tribunal, Carl from Stoke says, George, the first on the hate sheet for war crimes, in my opinion, should be Piers Morgan. This is someone who I cannot call a man. I'll call him the heartless devil. He should be locked away for years and years, according to Cal.
He'll definitely be on trial at my tribunal. Whether he's the first or the most serious offender, I don't know. There are many contenders for that.
There are.
But he'll definitely be in the dock. And I hope he has the guts to come along and answer the charges. I've got this tribunal idea in my mind. The Bertrand Russell Tribunal put on trial the American conduct of the Vietnam War. I'm going to set up a tribunal like that. It will be unofficial, of course. It has no state power, has no power to detain anyone or force them to appear, but a moral power to compel people to come and answer for what they wrote, what they said on television, on radio, in many cases said over and over and over again, which turned out to be false, if not absolute falsehoods, and which manufactured the consent for Western governments to support Israeli crimes that have left 32,000 kids with no legs. Just think about that.
Think about that.
Sorry,
exactly.
Go ahead, Gayatri.
We look back fondly to the movie on Watergate, when journalism was truly journalism. moving on to your poll, will
point.
Israel accept the peace plan? Again, I just have to echo what you said earlier, that the majority has no trust whatsoever in Israel. Shirley Carmody says, if Israel accepts the peace deal, they do so knowing they intend to violate it. And Matthew White comments,
yeah, I mean, I would put it this way, Gayatri, if they accept the deal, then it isn't a peace deal. If it was a peace deal, they would reject it. That's really how I see it.
Yeah, and actually this is a very good way of putting it by Tomer Tufts. He says, will hyenas become vegetarians? Yes or no?
Very good.
Anyway, Matthew says, Israel has been embarking upon a gargantuan peace plan since October 7. The only difference is the spelling. They spell it as PIECE. Mostly pieces of innocent children body parts. They are truly devoid of humanity. Cool D says, that peace plan is a con, George, a dirty deal done behind closed doors between Israel and the US, forcing Hamas to surrender. Hence why Israel was reported to have accepted it. Russia exposed the scam and Israel let out the secret. What about that?
Well, Russia abstained, didn't vote against it, didn't veto it, which is interesting in itself. But they didn't vote for it. Everybody else voted for it. And again, what I said about Israel, I say about America. If America is supporting it, then it isn't a peace plan. It's certainly not a peace with justice plan. And no justice, no peace has always been our slogan. So we'll have to see how it plays out. Maybe by Sunday's show, we'll have a better picture. But as our audience in this poll make clear, there is widespread skepticism, to say the least, that this is any kind of genuine peace plan, and if it were, Israel wouldn't accept it anyway. Any more, Gayatri?
Let me close by this wonderful email that we got in from Ayaz. He says, I'm going to airmail the king and request that you, George, get knighted. We ought to address you by Sir George Galloway, especially for your lifelong work being on the right path.
How very kind. If I were Sir George, of course, that would make you Lady Gayatri. That would be a fitting couple of titles, I must say. Thank you very much, Gayatri, for that social media roundup. And I'll take you for chips after the show. Will Israel accept the peace plan, yes or no? Well, overwhelmingly, people said no. 26,330 people voted, which is quite high for a midweek show, actually. Now, just to recap, we're on the radio, as you now know, in the United States. So a big welcome to our new radio listeners in the United States today. We're on KPFK, right across Los Angeles and Southern California. However, the transmitters cover the city of Los Angeles and to the north, east, and south, from Santa Barbara to San Diego. KPFK is on 90.7 FM along the Malibu coast, but it's on 99.5 FM in China Lake, on 98.7 FM in Isla Vista. I'm sure these things are given to me because, well, there are hardly any more magical names anywhere in the world that you can read out. If I get any more, if that will roll up, I'll be able to tell you more. But first, here's Sam in Canada on Gaza. Sam, what would you like to say?
Yeah, it's not Sam, it's Anne.
I'm terribly sorry, Anne. Please forgive me.
My son-in-law says that Israel paid for the Palestinian land, that they bought it. And I don't believe that's so.
If he believes that, I've got a bridge here in the United Kingdom, I could sell them going very, very cheap. It's absolute balderdash and utter balderdash. The Nakba was as well attested to. There's lots of video of it. There's lots of testimony of it. Most of it from supporters of Israel. They stole the land. They murdered the people. And they drove 800,000 of them out as refugees, out from their own land and their own homes. Many of those ended up right up the coast in Lebanon, in refugee camps that I came to know very well. Others ended up in refugee camps in Syria. And in 1970, after Bloody Sunday, a larger number ended up in refugee camps in Jordan, and more of them entering Lebanon. So I'm afraid this is a piece of Hasbara falsification. It's a falsification of history. They could always show us the deeds if it were true. They could show the transaction if that were true, but they cannot, for there was no such transaction. So, from my point of view, Anne, the Palestinian refugees have the legal, never mind moral, they have the legal right to return. They have the legal right to return to their own property, their own land from which they were driven. And I have seen the deeds. I've seen the property deeds of the rightful owners, now held by a third generation of families that have lived out the last 75 years in refugee camps, rancid, rat-infested hovels in refugee camps in which they have been regularly massacred, regularly bombed, and in the best case, regularly the victims of bigotry and discrimination from the host governments. So I'm afraid, Anne, your son-in-law is simply wrong. Let's go to Michigan, not far away, where Jeff is on the line about politicians. Jeff, what would you like to say about them?
Yes, about politicians, but first about you. I'm concerned that you keep your health, and not just because of threats, but just internally, because we all rely upon, our minds all rely upon the condition of our bodies. I know you were a boxer at one time and you're highly disciplined that way. I hope you get back to that, because I want to see you around for a long time. We, here in America, we need somebody like you, George. We don't have anybody. Dennis Kucinich has his mind in the right place.
That's really very kind, Jeff. Yeah, we have to generate it, though, from the United States. I've got American blood in my veins, as you might have heard me say before. My great-great-grandmother immigrated from New York to Dundee in Scotland. I reckon she got on the wrong boat, but that's what she did. But I can't be in America. So we have to generate. And the great state of Michigan may be the place that we will generate it. A big working-class, blue-collar state like Michigan has got to produce a new generation of Debs, a new generation of Malcolms, a new generation of people who will carry the real struggle forward. And I pray for that, very much so. Go ahead, Jeff. I interrupted you.
That's right. I absolutely agree with everything you said. And since watching you before the Senate and since watching you in the streets of London objecting to the war in Iraq, I've watched you, and I've had no reason to ever dissuade myself from my initial impressions. The second issue that I'd like to raise, most people don't get this because they're not in banking. They haven't been in banking. I was in banking before I got into law as a prosecutor and then as a private attorney. When I was in banking, I was familiar with what an investment bank is. Now, I'm just going to add this in part because I found recently that Rishi Sunak is a product of Goldman Sachs. This shocked me.
Yeah.
When you're in banking, in commercial banking, if you know a little bit of the history, and you look back to our greatest president, FDR set up a commission after the Great Depression, during the Great Depression, called the Pecora Commission. It was set up by a deputy attorney general he picked to chair the committee, find out what the greatest causes of the Great Depression. Number one, investment banks. Can you dig that? We're connected to commercial banking. That generated the Glass-Steagall Act, which prohibited investment banks from coordinating with commercial banks. That law was repealed in 1999 under Bill Clinton with the financial
by Bill Clinton, right?
Yes, 1999. And within 9 years, we were almost in the Great Depression again. And it happened because they set up a scheme. Now, this includes Larry Summers. It includes the former head of Citibank, trying to remember, Robert Rubin. Surely it includes Steve Mnuchin. It would include most of the names we know. And I'm just going to tell you, because you may not know, I don't think you were in banking at any time. And if you're not, you probably wouldn't know of these things. But these people are totally different from what you would call a banker. To be a banker, as we would view it, as people who are honest and save your money and invest it properly in good business and so forth and expect to be paid back, these people don't have any of those thoughts whatsoever. If they did, they'd be laughed out of Goldman Sachs, Salomon Brothers, Lehman Brothers. These are Michael Milkens. These are people like Steve Mnuchin, who destroyed Sears. These are people that wouldn't work a minute of the day as we would view work. And they pull their billions, millions, billions, because the scheming that went in the mortgage crisis, that was what 2008 turned into. That was the liar loans that they set up because they were connected with the commercial banks. They saw all that money, the depositors' money, to be used for their scheme, which was, let's just shovel that money out because we're connected to the banks now. Let's talk them into it. Shovel that money out to people, whether they have any credit worthiness whatsoever. Then we'll get the agencies, Moody's and S&P, to give it a AAA rating, those mortgages. Those mortgages were called liar's loans because they did no investigation of the background of the person that was mortgaging the house. They could put down what other income. Now, the reason I really got into this is because I represented somebody, a young man, maybe 25 years old, who bought a $400,000 house in L.A. In around the year 2000. And I looked at his financial record that he had signed. He said he didn't know what they put on it. He was earning $25,000 a month, they said. He wasn't making $25,000 a year. And so when the house
Well,
went
look,
upside
we're
down,
running out of time, Jeff, but I'm going to make you an offer. I'd like you to be our house attorney here at the Mother of All Talk Shows. That was a devastating critique that you issued there, and I agree with every single word of it. These bankers or banksters who took the world to the edge of catastrophe in 2008 and may yet take it to catastrophe in 2024-25 are fundamental to the late capitalist sickness that we currently enjoy, for want of a better word. Everyone will have noted that not one of the people or institutions that you mentioned actually produces anything, actually has any actual wealth. And therein lies the difference between the new world that I talked about in my monologue, where the sun is rising and where they actually produce not numbers, but wealth. and where, in the case of Russia, they have not numbers but actual wealth. They have coal, they have gas, they have oil, they have energy in super abundance, they have minerals, they have things that people actually need, must use, can't function without. None of these banks that you mentioned have anything except dollars based on nothing. As of tomorrow, dollars and euros are banned on the Moscow Stock Exchange. A Rubicon more important than it might on the surface and at first glance appear. The world has changed. Dollars will soon be no longer welcomed, and all of America's debts based on a Bretton Woods system and the 1974 settlement in which oil would forever be traded in dollars has come to an end. You only know this if you read the smart papers. You don't know it if you read the dumb papers. And the dumb papers' primary purpose is to keep the population dumb. But a very big change is coming, and you are a very important correspondent to that fact. Imagine Michigan, a former prosecutor, former banker, is central now to the mother of all talk shows. He's our house attorney from now on. Look, a quick call. Forgive me, I'm over the time. It's Nasser in Los Angeles who promises a quick call. Go ahead, Nasser.
Oh, good evening to you. Thank you so much. It's an honor to talk to you. I have a book to want to show you, and I'm taking the trip actually to see you. I did the gamble, so next week I will be there because you asked the professor to give you a copy of it. The professor is super busy, so I'm doing it. But meanwhile, I want to, I defined an expression, never had time to write about it. It's called self-induced split personality. Unfortunately, a lot of politicians are suffering from this. And I mentioned it to Scott Ritter, my other hero. And I thought Larry Johnson would look at it, would like to hear it. But meanwhile, this gentleman who talked about Steve Mnuchin is absolutely right, because I always thought Amazon destroyed the small businesses, but Steve Mnuchin destroyed the department stores. Anyway, because I am so excited. I have given talks in front of audiences, but right now I'm so excited to talk to you. And I'm hoping to see also Roger Penrose, because he's my former professor's friend. Unfortunately, Wolfgang Rindler is not alive anymore, but I just wanted to go there and hope to visit giants like you and Roger Penrose. So please give me the opportunity.
Well, how very kind of you. But you'll have to come to Rochdale, Nasser, because that's where I am and intend to stay, from Los Angeles to Rochdale. Who would have thunk it would become a regular thing? Now, I've got to go. I'm actually well over my time. My apologies to our American radio listeners, but I do have to go because I've got to get back on the election trail, even at this hour. So, I'll take Gayatri for chips, and then I'll do some more electioneering. I hope to see you on Sunday for the mother of all talk shows. Thanks for watching.